Welcome to Mission Imperfect, the podcast about finding your own path, your own way, and embracing the imperfection of the journey.
We're your hosts, life coaches, former HR professionals, and mums, Kirsty and Catherine.
We love to discuss the topics that come up time and time again for our coaching clients and which affect us all, from things like acceptance and boundaries to values and well-being and everything in between.
Each episode ends with a question for you and us to reflect on. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to grab a cuppa and a biscuit and join us in getting lost in finding ourselves.
Welcome to another episode of Mission Imperfect. Today we are talking about acceptance. Lovely, juicy topic there, which I actually thought that would be quite a tricky one. But Kirsty, you totally flew with this one, and I was looking over some of your thoughts. Thought, yes, this is exactly what I was trying to say, but it was just in my head. So thank you.
Well, obviously we are the same person, you know.
Yes, exactly.
We know this, so yeah, it all makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, acceptance is something that I have really changed my view on in the last few years, because what I mean when I talk about acceptance is allowing things, whether that's situations, people, or feelings, to be as they are. And that idea of acceptance used to feel that it was kind of weak and cowardly, that it was giving up on the idea of making things better, that it was being resigned to how things are. And it used to feel that I had to spend a lot of time raging against what wasn't right, that it was wrong to accept it, and that if you weren't angry, then you didn't care, and if you didn't push against it, then you were kind of actively saying it was okay. And that used to feel all wrong.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's a misconception that acceptance is very passive, and therefore the raging part is the active part to fight against it. But actually, it's not totally passive. It doesn't mean that you necessarily like it. I think that's the difference. Acceptance doesn't mean, therefore I'm a doormat and I must accept and like what has come my way. It doesn't actually mean that. And I think that's what you're getting at when you're talking about the raging against it thing. Like, I don't like this and I must rage against it. But actually,
it's not fair.
Can be really, yeah, exactly. And I think actually the acceptance can be quite a rational starting point for thinking, do I want something to be different? And what can I do about it if I choose to be, to have something different? It's sort of your starting point of, this is where I am. This is actually the reality. And then making choices moving forwards.
Absolutely. Yeah, that it's just allowing it to be as it is. It's not it's not saying it is what it is and that's brilliant and I love this and it's the way it should be. It's not necessarily saying any of that. It's just saying this is the situation. And yeah, how does a lot of people sort of kicking and screaming and shouting it's not fair actually make anything better? I mean, as most toddlers discover when they do that, it really does. I mean, it doesn't achieve much, does it? So, and ironically, and kind of counterintuitively, the harder we try to resist something, actually, the more attention, time, and energy we are focusing on it, and the more we're doing that, the more we're keeping ourselves stuck in what we don't want, which that sort of sets the logic circuits in my head going, what? Really? Surely that can't be right. But all that time going, no, it's not fair, this can't be, is putting all your focus into the wrongness of the situation.
Yeah. It's not about solutions, is it? It's not about looking for, what do I want to change about this? What can I do about this? It's all about, well, it's not fair. So that's not putting you into any kind of active state of doing something, is it?
Yeah, and very often when we're having that sort of immediate reaction to something, that's true. It's not fair. It's not right. It shouldn't be like that. But it is. And so but it's not about resigning ourselves to be shat on from a great height. It's about understanding the reality of that shitstorm so that we can find the best ways of dealing with it. So, a very sort of practical example, at work, you don't get the pay rise that you wanted and believe you deserve. If you're around yelling at your manager and you're storming out, you're refusing to do what you're told, you're working to rule, you're dwelling on it, you're bitching about it to everyone who will listen and to a lot of people who won't, it's not actually going to change anything. That's not going to get you the pay rise you didn't get, and it's pretty certainly not going to put you in line for one going forward. And it doesn't actually help. But if you accept it, I didn't get the pay rise. Not, and that's right, I didn't deserve the pay rise, just I did not get it. Then you can start, as exactly as you said just now, trying to change things. You can ask for feedback about the decision-making process, the criteria that you needed to meet. And maybe you'll find out it was nothing to do with you. It was about what was available and applied across the board, whatever. But and then you can choose how you respond to that. Do you say, you know what, fair enough, now I understand that? Or do you go, no, it's still not fair? You can then choose, well, actually, I'm going to start looking for another job. Or actually, the benefits I have here, what I get from this job outweighs the disadvantage of not getting that pay rise. I'm going to stick it out, see if I can get a pay rise moving forward. It's exactly so. It opens up those options those choices that you have become more apparent when you start accepting and stop fighting.
Exactly. Or you could even, using that scenario, you could try to present your case as to why you still believe. And I know this is bordering in the not acceptance zone, but it could be, trying to present your case why you objectively as possible think you do deserve it. So perhaps you've got some comparison data, perhaps you can draw attention to some things that you did achieve, whatever it might be. But it's like the acceptance part does help you move past all the unhelpful emotions, that raging, the bitching, the stewing, and because those things just do, they're a short track to nowhere, aren't they? Let's be honest. They just keep you in an irritated state where you actually, it starts to sort of impede and cloud your judgment, doesn't it? Let's be honest. We all know that when we're in a heightened, angry or emotional state, we don't see things as clearly as we might do. So it's like the acceptance part helps you kind of move past the unhelpful stuff. The unhelpful stuff is probably going to happen. I think we all like to have a little rage and a moan, don't we? I had a moan to you, didn't I, just now, Kirsty, that it's boiling hot this week when we're working. Next week I'm on holiday. It's forecast for rain. So I've had my little bitch about that because that's sod's law, but I have got to accept it and just see what we will have a good time anyway. That's the thing. So I can accept it. If I stay here bitching and moaning about the weather, it's not going to change for me, is it? So
almost certainly not, although you never know with the weather at the moment. But I think an important part here is, for me, the acceptance doesn't mean you're not allowed to have that angry reaction. You're not allowed to throw your little tantrum and have a bit of a wobbly. Those emotions that come up, they're valid, and you're allowed to experience them and to feel them. You're allowed to accept that as well. But rather than sort of holding on to it, you can just let it go. You can have the tantrum. You don't have to stay in the tantrum. I think that's the point. It's not about that sort of saintly allowing everything to be as it is without a reaction and being all zen-like all the time. It's about the full-on acceptance. I'm angry, and that's okay, and it will flow through me. I fucking hate this situation, and that's okay. That this situation is what it is, and now I got that out of my system. I'm going to look at how I change that, how I get myself out of it, what I can do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what would you say the problematic areas are if you don't accept what the situation actually is presenting? What can that lead to issues with, do you think?
Well, I reckon we probably all know this from our own experience of, remaining stuck in the tantrum and refusing to accept it. But it's that repression and denial of emotions, at least on an outward level, it can be draining. Because if you So I just said you resist the emotions whilst talking about being angry about it, but it's you get stuck in that emotional spiral of, or vicious circle of still fighting against a situation that you're stuck in. And either you are fully in those emotions, or you end up having to repress them and deny them whilst getting on with the situation, but not truly accepting it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does.
Most of us can only display the tantrum outwardly for so long. And then we take it inward because we become aware that people stop listening and they're getting bored and we're not necessarily getting anywhere, but we're still raging internally. And that is just so draining. And that whole going over and over the whole thing in your head as if you can somehow change the outcome. I don't know if you've had that time when you've had a difficult conversation, argument or something, it's gone badly, and afterwards you're lying awake sort of 3 a.m. and why is it always 3 a.m? Why does it never have 2 or 4 o'clock? But it's at 3 a.m. and you're reliving that conversation, but with all the things you should have said.
Yeah. I think this is super common. Yeah, you replay an argument and you come out with a much better punchline. In the moment, it's like, damn, I should have said this. I just think it's such a fruitless thing to do, isn't it? And yet, I honestly believe we all do it. I laughed when I saw you put that in, because I thought, she knows what's going on in my head. But it just goes to show what a human thing it is to do. And I think, okay, yes, you may have that thought of, oh, I wish I'd said this. I wish I'd done that. But it's a bit like what you said about the raging and the tantruming. Okay, maybe acknowledge that was the case, but then you do need to let it go. You can't keep replaying that conversation over and over again, because truth is, it didn't go that way. Those things weren't said. The outcome isn't different to what it actually is.
Yeah. It's quite easy to laugh at it with the whole conversation scenario, but sometimes, when things have gone really pear-shaped for you and big shake-ups in your life, that almost sort of visceral longing to have done something different and for the outcome to be different, it can be really mentally and emotionally sort of draining and hard to deal with, can't it?
Yeah.
And I think the other thing happens when we persist in not accepting things as they are, especially when we might feel that we are somehow at fault in there, sort of linked to what we've just been talking about. You can end up starting to blame others. If you're going over and over again that situation and your part in it, our egos are going to struggle to take that level of self-criticism. So we start to blame others, to be critical of what others have done in order to try and feel a bit better about ourselves. And that's not a nice place to be. And all of that can turn into a whole load of sort of self-flagellation. It's this vicious circle. You start from, I was wrong, I shouldn't have done that, I wish I hadn't done that, and hitting up against the fact that actually this did happen. And so then you have to start trying to justify that and make yourself feel a bit better about what happened. And so then you become the others become the villain of the piece. And then it just goes round and round. And then you feel bad about your own feelings again. But that can turn into a real victim mindset, can't it? It can become, it was all everybody else's fault. I can't change what happened, so they should have done something different. And they should be changing the situation.
Yeah, things can escalate, can't they, in our minds? And actually, we can get a little bit far removed from the reality. Like one emotion sort of feeds another, and especially the longer that you stay in it and hold on to it, like the misjustice that you feel has occurred can actually be increased and become, an even greater injustice. And it continue, we end up moving further and further away from perhaps the reality of what has happened, because we are staying in this sort of non-acceptance space. And just to reiterate, we're not saying it means you like it. We fully accept that may not be the case, but we're trying to contain it into its sort of realistic state and then making choices rather than stewing and stressing and actually amplifying it and making it worse than it actually is.
Yeah, because when we're stuck in that resistance, that refusal to accept things, we're going to miss opportunities to make it better, aren't we?
Yeah.
We are so busy focusing on what is wrong and unfair, and maybe how bad we've been or how wrong other people have been and how they're letting us down and we've let ourselves down and everything else. The more we're thinking like that, the more our brains are going, oh, this is what we want, and looking for more evidence of it. And so you're going to find it increasingly hard to see ways of making things better, of being able to move forward.
Yeah, you just get increasingly frustrated, don't you? Because there's a mismatch between what you're expecting to see and happen and have as an outcome and what actually is the case. And if we're not careful, those things can get further and further apart. So we were saying about this amplified cycle. So I think that definitely shows the downsides of not accepting what is. And on the flip side, of course, you've spoken on about what acceptance facilitates and how important that is. So I think that's a really important message for people to hear, because like we said, it's not actually this really passive thing. It's just an important step into the what next part. And sometimes the what next part, of course, can be nothing, because we've spoken quite a lot about difficult situations, but actually we're talking also about acceptance of who we are, aren't we, as people. And I think you've got some really great things. It's probably a little bit further ahead to talk about that, about self-acceptance too, which I think, just to make it clear, we're talking about acceptance in quite broad terms today.
Yeah, I mean, self-acceptance. I mean, I think that, speaking very personally, I've spent a long time, most of my life probably, failing to accept who I am and feeling that I should be living up to different standards and expectations, and, all the, we've spoken before about the conditioning we get by mass media and social media and those around us, and that constantly trying to be something we're not. But when we stop trying to deny or repress the aspects of ourselves that we've learned to consider as unacceptable, that's when we can start to see ourselves so much more clearly and compassionately. That's when we can learn to make better choices for us, and change the behavior that in ourselves that bothers us. And I think it's very much about need that acceptance that maybe we're okay. Maybe we're allowed to be who we are, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean that everything we do is right. That doesn't mean that every sort of feeling or thought or way of looking at the world feels that we're currently experiencing feels good to us. But it opens up the possibility of starting to see that as part of how we are and what we do rather than who we are. And then you can start to change it. And to me, that feels powerful. Again, it's not saying, well, this is how I am, take it or leave it. I'm always going to be stroppy at this time of the morning, or, maybe you are, but maybe once you recognize that, you can start to change it. You start giving yourself choices.
Yes, definitely.
And again, that there's the acceptance of others as well. Now, that obviously you're not going to advocate that then needs to trying to change others, but it does start to give you choices about how you relate to them and what you believe is possible in your relationship with them, and how you then choose to move forward with it. And yeah, you can't change other people. You don't have the right or the responsibility to do that. But your relationship with them, that's something that you can have some control over and make choices about. When you accept other people as they are, you can do that with your eyes open.
Yeah, there's definitely something about acceptance and things that are and aren't within our control, isn't there? Because I think this is probably something we'll talk about another time. I think humans do tend to believe, with good intention, that a lot more is within their control than actually is. And therefore we feel that we can influence things a lot more than perhaps we realistically can. And therefore there might actually be more acceptance needed than perhaps we realize. I hope that makes sense, because there are so many things that, yes, you're absolutely right. So other people is 100% in the not within control sphere, if you like. But our interactions with and relationship with obviously is some influence, because it's our side of that relationship that we can have impacts on. We can't absolutely control it because there are two parties at play, but we can absolutely, going into any relationship, there's how we conduct ourselves that is going to have an impact. If you come in and you start insulting someone, clearly that's not going to go down too well, as opposed to if you are supportive and, all those other positive characteristic traits, it's going to have an impact on that relationship.
Yes. And just the communication you're willing to have, and once you understand what you sort of want and need from a relationship and where that's not being met, that gives you the option of communicating that to the other person, of seeing if that can change and having an honest conversation about maybe where their needs are not being met as well. And maybe that leads to a better relationship. Maybe it leads to a recognition of moving on. But it's in accepting that the other person is who they are, that you are who you are, and what the situation currently is. That's where you start seeing options and ways of moving forward, rather than desperately hoping that they are going to change.
Yeah.
Or desperately trying to make it all down to you to change who and how you are in order to make the relationship work.
Yeah. I think you hit on a very important point there about, compromise, effectively, isn't it? Because, and this is something we're going to move on to talk about in another episode, about boundaries, about how far do we move versus how far might someone else move? What is acceptable? And at what point does it become perhaps a mismatch, a misalignment? And actually the acceptance part there might be, has this relationship, just using that as an example, has it potentially run its course, or has it just evolved as the people in it have evolved, and then therefore they've perhaps grown apart? And it's not about fault, it's not about blame, but it's not about control, and then therefore, you must change now to fit into my life, or I must change to fit into your life. It's actually, that might be possible if the movement is not too far, but it may not be. And accepting that maybe that is the new reality, just going back full cycle to where we started, about what is actually the reality that we're facing here, rather than thinking, well, you've changed so much since we started this relationship and I haven't, because chances are that's not actually true.
Yes, it's just that acceptance. I think the importance of acceptance, for me, to sort of summarize, is threefold. So it helps us to process that which is beyond our control, back to control again. Past events, including emotional reactions that have they've already been triggered, that we're already experiencing, and other people. These things that they have happened, we can't change them, but that acceptance allows us to process. And it allows us to find ways to change what can be changed for the better. So, we've got future choices around how we behave, about how we relate to other people. Once we accept where we are, we can start identifying them. And then what we've just been talking about, that aspect of acceptance, showing us that we can make conscious choice and compromise, because there's the ways to change what can be changed for the better, but maybe we make a conscious choice to compromise on a situation, to say, it is like this and it's not ideal, but I believe it's better than other options.
Yeah.
Because this is mission imperfect. Life is not perfect, right? And we acknowledge that. And I think I used to have this kind of romantic ideal about all aspects of life, that there was this perfection out there that you could and should strive for. And I don't have that anymore. There is an element of acceptance around life is not perfect. And, in a romantic relationship, or in a friendship, in a family relationship, that there is almost certainly always going to be something that niggles. But probably more than one thing. And it's about accepting the overall situation and recognizing I choose to accept all that is good and to enjoy all that is good. And in doing that, sometimes I have to accept that there are the niggles as well. But that comes back to control, I think, because in consciously making that choice, we take control. It's not a resignation to a bad situation. It's it's a conscious choice to accept a good situation that is imperfect.
Yeah, I think you sum this up so well with this comparison. It's like, this is how things should be, and I'm going to strop and sulk until something changes and becomes what I want it to be, versus this is how it actually is, and what are my options. And I think we all know realistically that second option is going to be the more helpful, realistic, constructive, all of those things. But it's also very human to get a little bit stuck in that first one. But I think, and we weren't saying don't have those emotions, it's just don't perhaps stay there for a huge length of time.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it isn't, it's not an either or, is it? It's almost the process. We have the strop first, and then we...
Yeah. Yeah.
We accept that. We accept that, and then we can start accepting the bigger picture, and then we can start going, okay, what am I going to do? So as ever, some quotes. And I found one from Michael J. Fox that just summed it up. Maybe we could have just said this instead of having the episode. It might have been quicker. But acceptance doesn't mean resignation. It means understanding that something is what it is and that there's got to be a way through it.
Yeah. I think that perfectly sums up what we've just said. It's not this passive resign yourself to some kind of miserable fate. It's not that, but it's appreciating this is the reality, because as we've said, life is very imperfect. It's not going to all go swimmingly. We all know that. So what are we going to do to find our way through it? I think, he summed that up really brilliantly. We could have just read that sentence, couldn't we, Kirsty? And said, today's episode.
Is a record for the shortest podcast ever? We could have done that, yeah.
Yeah. I like this one, very simple, and this was George Orwell. Happiness can exist only in acceptance. It's a very forthright one, isn't it? About you can only have happiness in acceptance.
Yeah, that's really got things processing there, because it's so simple that you have the okay, and then suddenly oh okay, and more comes up from it. But if you are resisting, can you be happy in fighting and resisting and denying? I don't think you can you? Interesting. And then there's something that we've talked about quite a lot in various episodes is awareness. And this one from Nathaniel Brandon brings that into it. The first step toward change is awareness. The second step is acceptance. And that combination can actually give us a lot of power to choose our way through whatever's happening for us.
Definitely. So we're going to end with a question, as we always do. So Kirsty, I'm going to ask you first. So what helps you to stop resisting the reality of a difficult situation or feeling?
Okay, well, for me, conscious awareness, always a good thing, plus just saying to myself, and that's okay. Which sounds a bit weird, but, I feel bloody miserable right now, and that's okay. It's just allowing the situation. That is how I feel. I'm not saying I'm going to feel bloody miserable forever. By acknowledging it, I don't condemn myself to be stuck in it indefinitely. In fact, that allows it to flow through and stops making it quite such a big deal. And, I fucked up, and that's okay. And maybe I don't always believe it when I say that, but it's a little signal to my brain to start going, okay, you're saying it's okay, so I'm going to need to look for evidence that it's okay, because our brains like to prove us right.
Yeah.
So it just helps me start shifting things.
And mine's not too dissimilar, actually. Mine is that I sometimes will just have to almost tell my ego to move aside for a bit, because I'm probably trying to protect myself and think, but I did a really good job, or but I really thought that this would go better. I just think I have to accept, just almost like pick it up, move it to one side for a minute, because I think that could be that sort of slightly inhibiting protective layer where I'm not really accepting the reality of what I've done. So I can reflect on some things I've done recently and thought, actually, if I'm being really honest, I've learned a lesson now. I'm not doing it with blame, but I've realized this is possibly why I ended up with this outcome, because of X, Y, Z. And if I wasn't being honest with myself, I probably would have totally ignored those factors and be like, oh, well, it's just a bit unfair. I don't understand why, but that's not me being honest with myself. And also, I think I've become a bit more willing to accept that actually these outcomes are rarely going to be permanent. Like, so this discomfort too shall pass. Yes, okay, maybe that presentation didn't go as well as perhaps I hoped, whatever it might have been. But actually, it doesn't matter as much as I'm probably giving it that weight to in the moment. So I think I am learning to deal with that discomfort a bit better, which is something we've spoken about in another episode, isn't it? Sort of learning that we do experience discomfort just as much as we do with life's ups and downs. We've said before, everything's very imperfect. So we're going to experience these things, and being much like you've said, these bad things happen, but that's okay. And it seems a strange thing to tell yourself, doesn't it? But it's like, this too shall pass. And I sometimes think the quicker you realize that, the quicker you actually move on as well.
Yeah, I remember once being asked, do you remember the first time you were angry? And you think, no. And you think, but at the time, it must have felt like this was the biggest deal in the whole wide world.
Yes. Now we don't even know what it was about.
Exactly. It's a good reminder, isn't it? Thank you.
It really is.
And so on that note, this too shall pass. Thank you for listening. And we'll be back with another episode of Mission Imperfect next week. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Mission Imperfect.
Please visit the show notes for details on how to contact us and for any resources we may have on the topic discussed.
Until next time, keep being imperfectly you. No one does it better.